Well, we're back to the history of St. Benedict's Parish and School. And as I said earlier, I'm taking pretty much all of what I'm going to be able to tell you from the master's thesis of Sister Mary Hilda, the Franciscan sister who was a member of the order that taught at St. Benedict's for many, many years. Her order came over from Holland in the late 1800s. They were invited to Buffalo by the Jesuit fathers. They were invited to come and assist in the St. Anne's and St. Michael's parishes in Buffalo, New York. My mother grew up in St. Anne's Parish and went to grade school there and was probably taught by members of the Franciscan order in those days. St. Michael's Parish, which was a large piece of property in the city, many people know was the original home of both Canisius High School and Canisius College, both of which were all male at the time. But it was also the original home of Sacred Heart Academy, which didn't move out to its present location in Eggertsville, down the road from St. Benedict's, until 1929. So the Sisters of St. Francis came to Buffalo as invitees of the Jesuits. They hold a special place in my heart. And again, as I said earlier, Sister Hilda, in pursuit of her master's degree, chose to write about the history of St. Benedict's Church and School, our parish. Now she begins, as I'm going to begin, in October of 1920 by printing the letter that was written on October 16th, 1920 by the then Bishop of Buffalo, William Turner. He wrote to the young Father William Tobin as follows. Dear Father Tobin, taking into consideration your zealous and efficient labors for the salvation of souls during the years that you have served as assistant rector of St. Mary's in Niagara Falls, New York, and during the past 4 years at St. Joseph's New Cathedral in Buffalo, New York, I hereby appoint you rector of the new parish to be organized by you in the vicinity of Eggertsville and Snyder, New York, the boundaries of which will be determined at a later date. You will therefore begin the work of organization at once. Wishing you every blessing in your new labors, I remain sincerely yours in Christ, William Turner, Bishop of Buffalo. So that was the letter from the bishop to young Father Tobin that really gave a start to St. Benedict's Parish. I would note that no name was given to this new parish to be organized by Father Tobin, and the boundaries of the parish were to be determined at a later date. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But in any case, with that as his charge, his assignment, Father Tobin came out to Eggertsville and began to get the lay of the land, introducing himself to as many of the Catholic families as he could locate, of which, by the way, there were only about 30 at the time. So, finding those 30 families, he celebrated the first mass, you might say, in our parish. It was celebrated at the Eggertsville Fire Company, the hose company on Main Street at Maynard Drive. I don't think it's the same building that still exists there, but it was for many, many years used as the local Eggertsville firehouse. He didn't have a place to live when he came out to Eggertsville, so he was invited to live in the home of George Farrick and his family on Main Street. And I guess collecting his new parishioners, as small a group as it was, he told them in December that he intended to hold a fair, a money-raising fair in January of 1921 with the goal of collecting as much as $5,000 to start the parish and build a church and do whatever was needed. Of the 30 families, most of them, I think, thought he was crazy. People earning $200 and $400 a year. And if there are only 30 families to deal with, it's pretty hard to raise $5,000. Well, Father Tobin made other friends as well, I'm sure, because in January, when they held that fair, they actually exceeded that goal and they raised $5,100. Oh my goodness, what a princely sum. So he was off and running. Now, he needed property, and he located a nice big piece of property at the corner of Main Street and Eggert Road. It was owned at the time by a gentleman named Jacob Brunner. The Brunner name is probably very familiar to our parishioners and many, many others in this part of town. Anyway, Jacob Brunner, he owned the property on which St. Benedict's Parish is now located. And on that property, he had for some number of years operated a saloon. Isn't that a wonderful beginning to a Catholic church? Well, hearken back to what I said about the age of prohibition beginning in 1920. That wasn't good for saloons. So I'm sure the 18th Amendment pretty much put Mr. Brunner out of the saloon business, at least for the time. I think he later went on, because prohibition ended after about 12 or 13 years, he later went on to build a new tavern and restaurant across the street, which still exists today. But in any case, it was that property that Father Tobin agreed to buy for the sum of $25,000 to be paid over time. Remember, Father Tobin didn't have $25,000 to hand Mr. Brunner at the time. But with that money, at least the money raised from the fair, the $5,000, he had enough to make a first payment to Mr. Brunner in April of $5,000. And with other money collected, they also had enough to break ground on a new, small, wooden church. The first church. It was thought to be a temporary church. It lasted really for about 10 years, but it was built over the course of 3 months in the spring and early summer of 1921. The material cost was most of the cost because the labor was provided by the men of the parish. They would work their day jobs, and after work they'd come to Main and Eggert and contribute their labor and help build our temporary church. The wooden church that they built was suitable to seat and accommodate about 300 parishioners. Now, in the meantime, the saloon had been undergoing some renovations in order to be used as the first schoolhouse. So imagine being the parent of these children, sending your children to a saloon for their early grade school education. Kind of an interesting thought. Sister Hilda said there were stories to be told of passersby who remembered the saloon fondly and would stop in for a drink and not find a bartender, but a bunch of children being taught by a couple of nuns. So went the days of the saloon. But the saloon, reconverted to use as a schoolhouse, was the schoolhouse with some addition over time for about 10 or 11 years until 1931. So there we have the small temporary church, which was dedicated by Bishop Turner in August of 1921. We have the reconverted saloon as a schoolhouse which entertained its first class, I think of 32 students, in September of 1921. So Monsignor, or, I'm going to call him Monsignor from time to time, because to me, when I knew him in my own early days in the parish, he was Monsignor Tobin, and he became Monsignor Tobin, but in those days he was still Father Tobin. In any case, he was off and running. Now, Sister Hilda doesn't tell us exactly for how long he lived with the Ferrick family on Main Street. She does tell us that the rectory in which I'm sitting now was not built until 1928. So whether there was a room on the back of this new wooden church that provided a home for him, or whether there was a room on the back of the old saloon, the school building, that provided a home for him, I'd vote for the school building, because after all, Father Tobin was Irish. I think he liked an occasional drink, and there were probably still some fixtures in place from the saloon that allowed him to entertain that old habit. Not to suggest that he had a drinking problem, of course. So, off they went.